Thank you very much for joining us with our Career Conversations Session 2. So I'm joined by Richard today, which is lovely. Richard, I wondered whether you might be able to introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name's Richard Turner. I have a nickname. Some people know me as Haggis. Not sure if that will come out in the consequence of this discussion, but we'll see. And I've been 30 years now. I've been fundraising. And yeah, I've had some really great moments. I've had a few dips as well, some moments where I've had to brush myself down, but I think that goes with the territory. Yeah, and what I found is actually sometimes those dips have then led pretty directly to the big highs that I've had. So it's something, I wish I could say to myself, don't worry, you'll be fine, looking back.
Brilliant. So we'll start at the beginning, I guess. So Richard, what did you want to be when you were growing up? Were you an impassioned fundraiser from the age of 5?
I found this, I dug this up because I wanted to be a diver.
Oh, wow, that's a great photo.
Was a diver. Even when I went to university, I joined the diving club and they kicked me out after a year when they found out I couldn't swim. I was so keen to be a diver, and eventually I did learn to swim and dive, but that was my passion. And to this day, it's just something, if I ever get the chance, I love going for a scuba dive somewhere. It's just fantastic. Really recommend it for anyone who's never done it.
I love it. So how did you go from wanting to be a diver to becoming a fundraiser?
Well, the link is Loughborough, and I know you had Andrew Ball on last week from the Loughborough Development Schools, and so I went to university there, and Loughborough has one of the most active student rags in the country, if not in the world, and I got involved with that, and it just opened my eye to this world of fundraising, and all these charities as well, and these professional fundraisers, and so that's how I got involved with fundraising, as did a whole run of us at the time, because we managed to get a grant from the Prince's Trust to unite all the rags, because the National Union of Students didn't really facilitate a student rag, and that suddenly got us all together. It attracted charities who wanted to understand more about student fundraising, and a whole host of us entered fundraising at the same time, because we suddenly saw this career that you wouldn't see, say, at a school careers fair or even at a university careers fair. So that's how I started. I got a lucky break. Oxfam offered me a 3-month contract, and I was with them for 8 years in the end.
That's an awfully long 3-month contract.
Yeah, and it was sort of one contract after the other that I managed to land on events, often working with students and young people. But then I got into others. And the great thing, if you ever work for a large organization like Oxfam, you just learn so much from all the other departments that you get exposed to. So next I went to a much smaller organization called Farm Africa. And at the time it was just starting its sort of fundraising. And I think lots of things that I didn't realize I took for granted were sort of seen as a bit like sort of rocket science. And it was my first real fundraising management job. And I was there for 5 years and loved it. I had a fabulous boss as well. So I think there's a real challenge between working for big organizations where you're a smaller niche, or larger or smaller organizations where you have perhaps more responsibility and but stretched with resources. And I think it's always good to get perhaps a bit of experience of both during the course of your career.
I definitely agree with that. So do you want to tell us what you're doing at the moment and sort of in your current role?
Yeah, well, I started doing some of my own, and in a funny way, I'm doing more consultancy and working with a range of organisations. A charity called SolarAid, which I worked for 5 years for, which I loved working with, and I still do a little bit with. And then I'm also, funnily enough, working with alongside a chap called Alan Clayton. And Alan and I were both involved in Student RAG 30 years ago. In fact, it was that sort of national association of RAGs that led us into fundraising in the first place. So you could say that I'm back to where I started after all this time. And I think fundraising is in a really interesting time, not just, I mean, outside of this current context. I think it's, you know, we've gone through a time where there was lots of bad press. I think about fundraising where it just sort of felt a bit too intrusive, and was now sort of getting back into a way where we were giving a much better experience to supporters and valuing them and their relationships. And I think even during this crisis, there's been some really fantastic supporter communications and showing that people, you know, they like to give at a time of crisis and they feel good. So we have a role to play in making people feel good right now. So I think, yeah, interesting.
We absolutely do. So you've obviously had a real vast career in fundraising. Were there any particular highlights, anything that really stands out for you?
Yeah, well, there's where to start. I think my first major gift, I remember, and it was all the way it shouldn't be. So it wasn't as if I did, you know, could do this fantastic presentation. It was at Farm Africa, and we needed to raise about £50,000 in 48 hours, or we'd lose this huge grant. And it was a forestry project in Ethiopia. And I started to apply what I'd been taught, which is, okay, who do you know who knows someone? You know, you need that introduction. You can't go to people cold for that sort of major gift. Who has an interest in forestry work? And there was one of the board members, in fact, the president, knew someone who you might label as a tree hugger. But it was clearly someone who had the capacity to give. So we had the connection, the motivation, and the capacity. And so I got in touch with them, and right at the wrong moment, this person calls me. I'm in this tapas bar off the Kennington Road in London. It's noisy inside, it's noisy outside, and I have to ask this guy for a £50,000 gift. And I learned a really important lesson then, that it doesn't really matter. You know, you don't have to have the perfect situation, because I had those three things ticked. You know, the right person. He was motivated and he did have the capacity. Although his reply was, I'm sorry, I can't give you 50,000, I'll give you half. And that was my first major gift. And we raised the rest because it was a lot easier then to go to another donor and say, we need to raise 50,000, we've got 25, you know, will you contribute? So that was a really magical moment, I think, that I sort of sticks out.
Did you go back in the tapas bar and have a drink to celebrate?
Yes, yeah. Of
course.
I mean, I think the ones that really stand out are the chance, particularly because I've had some roles in international development, is visiting projects and having the opportunity to go out to see things. And that's been, you know, that's very memorable. That sticks in the mind. I've got a photo. Do you want me to show you a photo?
Go for it.
And see if this works. So this is a photo. It's when I went to, I'll explain the context first. So I was on my first ever project trip with Oxfam, and we're up in northern Kenya, right on the border with Somalia. And on leaving, before I left Oxfam, I took some photographs of fundraising, just thinking, oh, maybe I could show them to the Oxfam staff. And the Oxfam staff liked them so much that every time we visited a community, they got me to show the community. So we got to this one point with all these camel herders, literally, you know, around a watering point. And I had to show what Oxfam, what these photos were. And apparently suddenly there was this silence, and this guy got on this soapbox, and he starts waving my photographs in the air, and everyone's sort of nodding and shouting and you know, and so on. And the Oxfam person translates to me, and I said, what are they saying? So here's the picture, and it's a picture of students fundraising for Oxfam. And the reason they were so taken by this is they didn't realize what Oxfam was. They thought Oxfam was some sort of bank. And you know what they were saying, this man was waving the photographs saying, look, parents in Britain are sending their children out to the streets to raise money for us. You know, we must use this money wisely. And it was a great moment, and a realization that, you know, we have a role in sharing our stories, and, you know, particularly, you know, when you operate in this sort of context. Yeah, and so, you know, moments like that, you know, I'll take with me, you know, forever. And, you know, always get the opportunity, if you can, to go see the work. If you can't, talk to a colleague and, you know, get their stories, and you know, is another way to arm yourself going forward.
That's brilliant, and what a great photo as well. That must have been yeah, what an experience.
I think my favourite role, though, has been when I was, which is a bizarre background. It was at Farm Africa, not Farm, at SolarAid, and the two go hand in hand. Actually, they're both my two favourite organisations I've worked with. And I was in a bit of trouble, so a year in, things weren't quite working. I was trying a different strategy, and so I had all my line reports stripped from me, in effect. And a new executive director was in, who had a little bit of an understanding of marketing and fundraising. So she sort of kept me on and just let me loose. And that was great. Suddenly I had no line reports, and I had all this freedom to do what I needed to do in terms of front-facing fundraising. And then after a few months, people realized actually this was working really well, because I didn't have to deal with management, and I was meeting supporters and donors, seeing funding opportunities faster than ever before. And we were doing really, really well. So we created a role called Chief Fundraiser. So I wasn't Director of Fundraising, I was Chief Fundraiser.
Chief, what a great name, Chief.
Get out there. Just say, you know, to the team, right, I need a you know, proposal. And then, you know, someone would give me a proposal, and I would give it to a supporter, or, you know, I need this done. And it was a recognition that often fundraisers, as they build up experience, get shoved into management. Whereas actually sometimes I think, you know, there's an opportunity for fundraisers to go more into, you know, sticking at what they're really good at, and enabling them to continue that, and recognizing that. So I would say that would be probably one of my highlight, you know, periods, if you like, over a number of years.
Well, that's lovely. So if you don't fancy management, you can go into chiefship instead. Yeah.
I mean, I think management is hard, and I think there's lack of recognition about the training that anybody needs who gets promoted up through into management.
So I guess that comes on to our next question, which is about leadership. So I wondered if you could tell us what you think makes a good leader.
Well, the best leaders I've worked with are the ones that give me flexibility. And, you know, there's been a sort of sense of trust. So I had a fabulous leader at Farm Africa called Christy Peacock. And she just gave me the freedom, and she trusted in me to do things and didn't micromanage me. There's only once I got into trouble. We decided suddenly to change the newsletter from something which was quite fancy and colourful and large to something much briefer and shorter. And we came up with this great name called From the Field. And Christy came up to me one morning and said, "Richard, I really like the new newsletter that came into, you know, I got delivered at home today with a lovely covering letter from me. Next time, can you make sure you check this by me?" But it was great. I mean, she was sort of telling me off, but so, you know, giving, you know, saying well done, but, you know, gave me an important lesson. But she was fabulous. And then there have been times where I've had to leave an organisation because I've had leadership that I felt I've just not clicked with. And it's really difficult. The more senior you'll get as a fundraiser, if you don't get on with your boss or the chief executive, it's really hard. And I'd recommend, you know, think twice about sticking on, as much as it's good to. You know, I think the places I've got the most is where I've been there for a good period. And I would say the first year for any real fundraiser is probably your third year. because your first year you're learning from someone else who's gone before you. Your second year is you're learning from your first year, and your third year is when you have your greatest impact. And then if I look back at the two organisations I really loved working for, SolarAid and Farm Africa, I was there for 5 years. So I think there's, it's something about if you can have a leader that will, value you and give you that bit of freedom. Yeah.
Very good. So I guess that brings us on to motivation. So what motivates you to be a fundraiser? What motivates you to get up in the morning?
Mornings are hard, aren't they? They're really difficult. I mean, I get into a habit of going for a run, partly just to get this thing flying in the morning. But it comes back to the why, and that comes back to going out to see the work if you can, or understanding the purpose of the organisation, and really nailing that as best as you can. And your why is not what you do as well. It's something quite emotional, and that's why I think storytelling in the context of fundraising is really important, because storytelling is where you get into that emotional space. And it's certain, I think what really when I had this difficult patch at SolarAid, what really pushed me on was a real belief in what we were doing. We set what we called BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal, to eradicate the kerosene lamp from Africa. And it was a crazy thing to do at the time, but it really set us on fire. It really got us all worked up. This is, to show you how powerful it is. I mean, it was completely changing what we were thinking and doing. I set myself a BHAG. I decided I would do a triathlon, just to see. I'd never done one before, and I couldn't really swim, remember. And it really pushes you, because so I'm trying to learn to swim and it's not working. So I then, take classes, and then classes aren't enough. So I get an instructor to help me. And that's the same with the BHAG. If your organization sets yourself almost an impossible dream, it will push the boundaries. And in fundraising terms, BHAGs are fabulous, because donors love to fill the gap. They love to be able to say, actually, you're just going to get to this point, but with your support, you can get it up here. And yet so many organizations, want to sort of stick to what they know they can deliver. I would say, make it impossible. And then you'll be quite surprised. And even if you don't get all the way, it doesn't matter. You'll get a bit further. So, set the bar really high, and that'll get you up and hopefully out of bed in the morning.
And I guess that comes on to about looking to progress within fundraising. So are we suggesting that personal BHAGs are the way forward?
Yeah, I would really push your organization about what's the ambition, what's the big problem that you're there to solve. And all charities were set up to solve a problem. There was something that fired people up. Probably fundraising was one of the first things that happened. This is outrageous, we need to raise some money. But what happens very quickly is organizations lose that, and maybe because they do lots of things, and so their purpose gets sort of missed along lots of what's, if you like. So I think it's having a real sense of that. I really recommend, try and go beyond the average 2 years that a fundraiser stays as an organization, if you can, if you've got a good leader. Because if you do, I think you will reap the benefit of both your own learning, and you'll come away with that satisfaction. I think the things where I've really enjoyed it is the satisfaction of what we achieved at SolarAid beyond the money, which was really having an impact of solar lights distribution in Africa, and the same at Farm Africa, where we really dealt with some real extraordinary moments. Where there was a famine in 2000, where I think we were, one of the best in responding to that, even though we weren't an emergency response agency. So I think when you feel part of that as a fundraiser, it's really, really fantastic. It's sort of where it's not about the money, it's about that impact. that you have, but you're more likely to get that if you stick with it over sort of a period of time, if you like.
Good advice. That's really good advice. So what do you find the most challenging part of fundraising, and what do you find the most enjoyable part?
Challenging. Well, management is hard. Managing people is really hard, and but I learned some great tips. I mean, I came to realize that you've got to work on it, and there's a really good podcast called Management Tools, which I started to listen to, and the one bit of advice they gave is whether you are managed or whether you line report someone, meet every week, because weeks are very tangible blocks of time, and meet for just 30 minutes. And, the first 10 minutes is about, you, or, if you're your line report, and then the next 10 minutes, you sort of flip it around, and then you've got 10 minutes more to start to think about ongoing stuff, and do it every week without fault. And you'll find it's a really simple technique. Don't make them long meetings, make them nice, make them half an hour, and you'll get a sense of what someone's working on if you're line reporting with them. And if you're being managed, you're getting the sense that you're being looked after as well. And all of a sudden that challenge and difficulty became much, much easier for me. The thing that's challenging but really enjoyable is doing things like phoning up supporters or going to see supporters. So you think, oh, I'm really nervous about making this call. Every time I've ever done it, I've always gone, God, why didn't I do this before? Because you usually end up having a fabulous conversation. You can always ask someone, well, why do you support us? And it usually opens up a really fascinating story. And if people don't want to talk to you, they'll say so as well. But I think having the courage to do that, and I would say anytime you have an opportunity to engage a supporter, an excuse to call them, or an opportunity to, even better, to meet them, drop everything else. You'll always have a busy calendar, but I always gain great value out of meeting people for real, because they do know your why, because that's what's prompted them to give to you. Giving a donation is a very special thing, really. Someone's going to give you 50 quid or, much more. And what are you going to give them in return? And so there's something underlying there. And I think the more you can meet supporters, the more you'll get closer to that why. Of course, the best and most enjoyable thing is when you can land a gift. That's great. When you, whether it's a major gift, or you've got to secure a corporate supporter, or maybe it's a group of supporters doing some community fundraising, and they sort of go way past their target. You sort of feel part of that. That's just a fantastic buzz. And then ultimately, it's what those gifts achieve. And I think that's where, if you hang around enough to see the impact, the fruits of all that fundraising you've done, and you can see, okay, I contributed to making us achieve that impact, that's when you go, yeah, this is the best job ever. So it's like, those are the sort of, I guess, the challenges and the things I've found most enjoyable.
That's lovely, Richard. Thank you. So current situation, we'll take it a little less work now, a little more play. Current situation, all lockdown. Have you taken this opportunity to do some professional development? Have you taken this opportunity to learn a new skill? Taken this opportunity to develop a new hobby?
Sort of. I mean, I do a lot of work from home anyway, and I'm not missing the commute to London. But the things I've sort of dug up a little bit in family history and so on. So we had VE Day, didn't we? So I had got some family members, one who died during the fall of Singapore. I started to dig up and do some history, find out a little bit more about his background and so on. And you can do that so well online. And I've gone through some family photographs and started to organize them. So just sorting through things that otherwise we just don't get around to. And of course, probably along with a great deal of the nation at the moment is trying out all sorts of baking and options and things in the kitchen, trying to use up that, you know, what's left over and what you can make the most of. And then also a little bit of not just the usual exercise. So I like running, but my daughter's got me into yoga at the moment. So I'm trying to do a yoga class several times a week just to sort of have a bit more flexibility in myself, which is a good thing. So it'd be great to come out of this where, you know, I've sorted out my photos. I know some really great recipes that I hadn't done before, and I'm a little bit more flexible as well.
Those are great ambitions. I know Natalie was saying earlier that she's taken her furloughed opportunity to develop professionally and get as much knowledge and information as she can do. So I think that's a really great approach.
And I would really, I think one thing I was reflecting on is years back. So I was in my dream job, and I actually found, I woke up one morning, I wasn't enjoying it. This was when I'd been at ActionAid for many years. And so I handed in my notice, and I was in between jobs. I had nothing to do, you know. And so what I did is I just read everything I could about how the world was changing and marketing and fundraising. And there's some really fabulous books out there. My favorite is by a chap called Grant LeBoff. And he's written several, but Sticky Marketing is is the favorite of his, but he's done some more recently. And it was like a light bulb going off, Amy, about how things have changed so much. But if I hadn't read that book in between jobs, I wouldn't have then gone to SolarAid with a real, you know, I had sort of epiphany of thinking to take with me that I was so excited to share and use, and it really influenced how we got on with things. And what I've realized is when you're in a job, it's really hard to sit down and read a book, you know, whereas when I was out of it, that's exactly what I did. Not only did I read it, I sort of rewrote, you know, notes on it and studied it. So use this as an opportunity, if you can, to dig up all sorts of books that people recommend and study and analyze them, so you come back really fired up as we come out of this, which, you know, I'm sure we will.
That's great advice. I wrote down that book name while you were talking, so I'm going to check out Sticky Marketing later. Richard, I just want to say thank you so much for your time and for your advice and your honesty about your career. Just finishing with a little bit of a silly question, which is describe your ideal Sunday to us, Richard.
Ideal Sunday. I think it's whatever it is. It's a Sunday where I've managed to clear the head of work. And I really recommend that. There's a temptation with our jobs to carry on working, and I always work so much better if I get to the end of the weekend and my head is empty of anything to do with fundraising. So whether that's getting out, you know, on a mountain bike, or whether it's getting lost in the garden. I sort of discovered gardening, you know, when I had my most stressful moments in fundraising, because you just get disappear into it. So I think it's aspects of that. Cooking, curries are great because the curries take, you know, you've got to pull together all the things. So a Sunday where I'm just lost in everything but fundraising, and then come, you know, the start of the week, then absolutely you can you know, go in at 100%. So that would be my best Sunday.
I think that's great advice, and very good advice, especially for those of us not furloughed at the moment. Just taking that time out is really helpful.
Absolutely, yeah. And even if you are, you know, structure your week so you have, you know, do some work during the week and then have a weekend break.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Richard. Was there anything else you wanted to add to anything we've chatted about?
Gosh,
put you on the spot.
No, I think as you will find, there will be ups and downs in any career in fundraising, and it's probably the one where you do have to brush yourself down. You know, the rejections that you get from funding applications or supporters, the internal conflict that always exists in organizations, and that will always be there because of the different cultures that sit, and fundraisers are usually a different breed of people than many other parts of an organization. And, you know, and the times in your career where you think, oh, I've had enough. But, you know, I would stick at it when you can, but also recognize when it's time to move on, and that, okay, this isn't the organization for you, because there will be one out there for you. And if you can find something that really ticks your box, gets your why going, that's what's going to help you get out of bed. That's what's going to help you push through those moments which are going to be particularly tough and difficult. And then I think you'll get a great deal of satisfaction, particularly if you can go and see the work. And funnily enough, particularly if you can go and see the supporters, because they're the ones who will just be gushing in how they're feeling about giving, and as a result of what they've managed to achieve from what you tell them. So that's how I.
Brilliant advice. Thank you so much, Richard. We've had a message saying thank you, brilliant conversation and questions. Answered the question, which was about books and which one was most impactful, and that they're getting their hands on sticky marketing too. So you have influenced someone already, which is wonderful news, Richard.
Great, and check out, Grant has a vlog. There's little snippets, so if you want a little taster of what Grant Leboff is thinking, check out his vlog, and then, like you say, if you're at a bookstore, go flicking through one of his books. But they're not written for fundraisers, but that's part of the fun. You've got to then translate it into your head, into how it would apply for fundraising. And if you're interested, get in touch with me, because I've met with Grant. Great thing about people like that, just write to them and say, I love your book. How does this work for fundraising? And they'll contact you back. But I've interviewed Grant a few times, and so if anyone's interested in what I've written up as a result, get in touch, and it'll just help you sort of think about how to apply his sort of thinking in the context of our world.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us as well. Next week, we are joined by Gary from Children First, who's the Director of Fundraising there. So it'll be a really good session as well. Richard, thank you. Everyone, thank you. Have a good rest of the day. Enjoy the weekend, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you, Richard.
Okay, bye.